Hello, and welcome to the Colts Cover 2 podcast. I am Joel A. Erickson. I am joined, as always, by Nate Atkins. We are in a situation now where the world explodes every week, right? A couple of days after the game. It exploded yesterday with the firing of Marcus Brady as offensive coordinator and the trade of Nyheim Hines, the requested trade of Nyheim Hines to the Buffalo Bills. So we'll get to that in a second. I'm going to start off though with so I don't forget like last week with what'd you bring for your prop?
I did bring a prop. They keep messing with me with these Tuesday decisions, so we'll hope this will still apply well enough. But this is The Quarterback Whisperer. It's a book by Bruce Arians that, first of all, I just want to recommend for Colts fans. And
Can we talk about the title? That is an audacious title.
It's bold. It's bold. That's Bruce, though. And that's why I like wish people who love Bruce, and I've always loved Bruce.
I kind of just wish he titled it "I'm Awesome."
Again, I grew up. Yeah. Hey, his best resume is this year's Bucs offense.
I am not saying he's not awesome. I'm just saying the title is.
I know.
It's
bold.
audacious.
It's Bruce. He's no risk it, no biscuit. When I was growing up, he was the offense coordinator of the Browns, and they made the playoffs, and then he left, and they didn't make it for like 20 years. So he's it's a good book. Colts fans, I think, would enjoy it because it does talk about coaching Peyton Manning and Andrew Luck, and of course that's where the franchise is reaching back to days when they had stability.
It depends on who you talk to if they want to think about that or not right now, because there was a lot of reaction on my Twitter timeline with Tarek Glenn going into the Ring of Honor last week that all this does is remind me of where we're not.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly what I was feeling, and with Peyton being out there, and then there's a game where it was 7-6 in the third quarter was what all those legends were watching, and I just bring it up though because Bruce, it's a good book about just kind of his process of getting quarterbacks confident, building offenses, and getting kind of building it over time, and how it's every quarterback he has, from Ben Roethlisberger to Carson Palmer to Andrew Luck to Peyton Manning, it's bad the first year. Or it's usually not that good the first year, and then it takes off from there. I mean, he only got 1 year at the Andrew Luck, but those other guys, it always built from there.
Wait, so I just want to – this is a revolutionary idea. You're saying, like, you could have more than 1 year with a quarterback?
It's amazing, isn't it?
What about, like, more than 7 games?
Oh.
Like, you're saying that, like, the ideal –
maybe it's an outdated
You're
book
saying the ideal scenario is to build with a quarterback over time.
Yeah.
Not just recycle different
just
ones.
Switch and change the offense in the middle of the season. Yeah.
What a strategy.
And that's what's funny. That's the irony of it, is he talks about building it throughout the entire offseason and building your coaching staff from the spring to now to get the most out of that specific quarterback. And Frank Reich's putting a lot on himself now to be sort of a quarterback whisperer, among many other things. I mean, our indication is that he is the full-time offensive coordinator now. So he's obviously a head coach, play caller. Now he's an offensive coordinator. Obviously, he's got other staffers that will help him with a lot of that. But this goes without saying, this is the toughest coaching job of Frank Reich's career, and it's as tough as he's ever had with a quarterback, because the mix of the guy he's putting in, the lack of experience with Sam Ehlinger, the fact that it's the middle of the season, and the fact that there are expectations. I think about like you think about the guys he's coached throughout his career, whether it's Phillip Rivers in 2 different spots, obviously Andrew Luck for a year, even starting with Matt Ryan this year. This is by far the biggest challenge. The only one that really compares to it in any way to me was Jacoby Brissett, that being thrown upon him. But even then, there was sort of it seems like there was an understanding that they weren't going to light the world on fire as a team. They could go 7-9, and it wasn't like his
well,
job
and
was on the
they
line.
had. I mean, it was a Brissett was a backup. You know, he was a backup who got thrown into it with 2 weeks to go, and they didn't have any other options. Yeah,
rather than middle of the season, and he was a backup who ran the offense of the guy in front of him, obviously to a much lower level. This is a very different deal where they're going from a true pocket sort of statue quarterback in Matt Ryan to a quarterback whose abilities are really on the move with Sam Ehlinger. And so really, I know this isn't what fans are going to want to hear. I liked a lot of the stuff they did with Sam. I liked the game plan. I liked the fact that they had 3 days of practice to build a completely different offense, and a lot of the stuff they did with him on rollouts and just in the run game, using getting conflict defenders and creating something in the run game with Jonathan Taylor, and they really got Sam comfortable. And so it comes off really weird this week when they fire the offensive coordinator after doing that. I know on the outside that probably looks like they think it didn't go well, but and we'll get into that. But the main thing I want to hammer home, though, is that, like, we're going to really learn, like, this is by far Frank's toughest job as a head coach and as an offensive mind that he's ever had, probably will ever have. And it's going to be fascinating to see how this goes about, how he does the rest of it. And I think the decision he made yesterday, to fire an offense coordinator actually goes back to the fact that he's taken even more control of this. And so he's trying to be, as much as he can in this chaotic season, the quarterback whisperer.
My mascot will apply to Nate. He may have used it earlier today. I don't know.
Oh, gosh.
It's a tire plug kit.
I knew that's what you were going to do.
Nate woke up to a flat tire today. How did you get it fixed, or is it fixed yet?
It's not fixed.
Well, you know how you could have fixed it with a tire plug kit.
All right. Well, I'll take that home and I'll try.
No,
to
you
figure
can't.
It out.
This is mine.
Oh, come on. I need help here.
This is mine.
So you're coming over?
No.
Oh.
No.
I hear you don't have anything going on, though.
Yeah.
No family,
nope.
There's nothing for the job to do.
Here's the thing about tire plug kits. You can't give them to somebody because then you won't have it in your car when you need them.
And you don't trust me to bring it back the very next day I see you.
No, I don't.
Okay. All right. Well, at least we know.
And you can tell I've used it already because there were four in here, and now there's two. But Nate could have used this today. All you really need after you get, you make the hole, clear it out.
All right. So now you're going to tempt me with what I could do if I had one of them.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you know what to do with one of these?
I've actually never used those. I've replaced the full tire, but I've never plugged it.
So my dad is really good at this. My dad can do this in my dad can plug a hole in a tire in less time than it takes my kids to decide what snack they're going to convince me to buy them at a gas station on a road trip. But you get
it's pretty good ratio. I feel like I'm guessing you use that example for that's like your measurement of time.
It's a very dad measurement of time. I'm hoping that the podcast listeners understand it, but it's a very dad measurement of time where like you get to the gas station and you're like, okay, this should take this amount of time, and then like you just feel the clock ticking in your head. And you're like, oh wow, this trip is getting really long in one gas station stop. Anyway, so what you do is you use this to pry out the nail or whatever it is. You clear out the hole because you want to have a nice place for the plug, which you thread through this little thing. Okay, and you put glue on both sides of it, and you put it in, and it's got a little seam here, and you just pull it out through the rubber.
Okay,
and that works really well. It says, I'm going to say some really bad car advice right now. It says that you should like immediately replace your tire. That's not really true. I learned from growing up with my dad that those plugs can go a really long time in a tire. So, and then the biggest thing is you just need to have air with it. So like you would need to have air. At my house, I have I do a lot of biking, so I have a very good bike pump, and it takes a lot to pump up a car tire, but you can do it without having to, get your car to an air pump.
I've been pumping. I have an air pump that had worked until it got to the point where it does not work. Which is
and as far as how it applies to the Colts, because it has to apply to the Colts, I did come up with it almost immediately when Nate texted this morning and said that he.
I'd hope so. The irony, if you were bringing that in and my tire was just out anyway, would have been great.
No, I hadn't come up with a great idea yet. Then and you were like, well, I woke up to a flat tire, and I was like, ha.
There you go.
Tire plug kit. My dad is very seriously like he could probably do your car in 10 minutes.
All right, have him come
Fortunately,
over.
he lives in Wisconsin,
Oh.
so. But there's twofold. The first one, this is going to be for mostly Twitter users. I don't know if regular people know this or remember this, and they might not at all. If you followed Nyheim Hines, there was a period here where he was tweeting about a flat tire like every other day.
Oh yeah,
like he had
he
like
loves
3
the
or
potholes.
4. He had like 3 or 4 flat tires, and I
didn't make that connection. This was Nyheim Hines' going away present.
Yeah.
Was to give me the tire problems.
He got traded, and I can't give him the tire plug kit. Not that I would. Again, never give someone your tire plug kit because you won't get it back, and then you're going to blow your tire. But so there's that with Hines, and I've got bad news for Hines. It snows and it's really cold in Buffalo. The roads there are probably bad too. So that's that. And then from a more macro Colts thing, it feels like they're trying to plug holes in this team over and over again. But the thing is, the tire plug kit, it's only worth so much. If it's a nail, it's fine. But the Colts haven't been dealing with nails the last couple of weeks. They've been dealing with giant ripped gashes in the tire. And in the one case, Sam Ehlinger proved to be a pretty good plug at the quarterback position. In terms of what he was able to bring them, the way he played, the poise he played with last week, he was a pretty good plug. Now there's another big one where you've gashed with the offensive coordinator, you've got a gash with Hines, and it feels like the car is falling apart around them, and the only tool they have is a tire plug kit. And we'll see. We'll see if they have more tools at their disposal. But that's what it feels like right now, is that more and more and bigger stuff is falling and breaking off of this team, and they're trying to fix it, and they just don't have the tools available. I thought it was an interesting text message I got from somebody else who covers a different team in the NFL, is not tied to Indianapolis, and trying to, like, in terms of what other people are looking at from the outside in and seeing in the Colts, and he's just like, why are the Colts treating everything like it's blowing up? I don't know. I think here it feels pretty normal and right because of the way things have gone. But just from an outside perspective, the reaction right now, I think the actual text message is, why are the Colts acting like they're 0-7 when they're 3-4? Which is an interesting. It's just an interesting outside observation. I think in the moment here in Indianapolis, it feels like all of this stuff is sort of a byproduct of this disaster that's going on with the offense and with a regime that's under a lot of heat right now. Nationally, it feels like to people nationally, I think it feels like an overreaction.
Yeah, and to continue the tire analogies for one last run, this someone else on the Colts beat last week made this comparison, but they said when they went from Matt Ryan to Sam Ehlinger, to that, the idea that was going to fix what's going on with this offense was like, if you have a car that the engine doesn't work anymore, you just replace the 4 tires and you think that's going to work. And that's kind of how it looked. Sam did play pretty well for what I thought he was going to do. Ultimately, an offense averaging 16 points a game and 2 turnovers had 16 points a game and 2 turnovers, because there's still issues much bigger than the tires in that offense. When they always fumble and they don't block and all that other stuff.
Yeah, shout out to Stephen Holder for this, but I thought it was a really important stat. The Colts are 3-0 this season when they don't turn the ball over, or when they're ahead in the turnover battle. They're 3-0. They're 0-4-1 when they're even or behind in the turnover battle. That's just sometimes it's not that simple, but it's also sometimes that simple.
And it's interesting, the tie was against the Texans, so it's like the best case scenario you have is you can tie the worst team in football when you play that way. That's the margin of error that they don't have this year, and it just comes up over and over again. It's interesting, though, you mentioned, like, it looks like what they're doing is what you do if you're 0-7. I understand why that would be a reaction from far away, just seeing some of these things. But, like, being here, I almost think they're doing this because they're 3-4-1. Some of this stuff, if they were 0-7, I think we would have seen a different trade than Nyheim Hines for a 6th-round pick that could be a 5th-round pick. They had other guys that I think would be valuable, guys in a contract year like Yannick Ngakoue that some team would have liked if it was the eye was on the future. The eye wasn't really in the future, and we'll get into why Hines was the trade they made. But, like, same thing with firing the offensive coordinator is that, like, if they were 0-7, I don't know that fixes the fact that you're 0-7. But from their perspective, if you put yourself in Frank Reich's shoes, like, there's no more time to wait on this. It has to get, I know on the outside it looks bleak, and the path for them is not very strong to see them actually fixing it. But they have to find any way they can. And to them, I think they're realizing this is kind of last week to do it. If they wait 3 more weeks, and if they're 3-7-1, it doesn't really matter. You could fire the whole staff, and it's like there's just not enough time to come back. So I actually think what they're doing shows even more urgency to try whatever you can to try to climb out of this hole. They've climbed out of holes in the past, and this is the hardest one they've ever had to climb out of. But that's ultimately how I've been interpreting what they're doing. But I know on the outside, I've gotten that same thing where people are just they wonder why there's just so many changes after changes after changes for a team that is 3-4-1.
Let's start with the Hines story, just because it's the easiest one to talk about. We have the most information on it. Nyheim Hines wanted out. They had the initial report, both from Schefter and from me, was that other teams were contacting the Colts about it. The Colts were not shopping him. Draw your own conclusions about the running back who wanted out, and then teams start calling about how that happens. But he'd wanted a bigger role in the offense. It's never really progressed beyond what it's always been. He's always been the satellite back here, third down back, plays somewhere between 30% and 40% of the snaps. He was right in the middle of that this year. He was the 35.2% of the snaps in the 6 games he was healthy for. The role was pretty much the same. And that came from that comes after an offseason of saying that Hines was going to play a much bigger role in the offense. They were going to play him in the slot more. They were going to do more to get him on the field with Jonathan Taylor. I have some thoughts on why that's developed that way, but I want to hear your initial reaction first.
Yeah, that's absolutely what I thought this was. I remember predicting to people yesterday that he'd be gone, because that was just my impression coming away from that game, was that this guy needs a change of scenery. He needs something that has a chance for what he was expecting, and they just are not, and they're not getting value out of that role. I mean, they wanted it too. Frank Reich talked about, there's a clip going around where he said, if I was a fantasy football owner, I would draft Nyheim Hines this year. They really thought this was going to work, and I tell you, when you watch in the spring, and it was, of course, we learn how little this matters, but spring practice where they were just trying to build chemistry with a new quarterback. Nyheim Hines looked great, and it fit a lot of what Matt Ryan stylistically was supposed to play with, as a guy who does take the check down and can motion him out and do things pre-snap. And the way it's played out, it just between the lack of blocking, between teams spying him, between really comes down to a lot of that. And then he missed 2 games as well and everything else, and then they just don't want to run enough when he's averaging 2 yards a carry. It didn't materialize, and I know what Nyheim was worn down by is he got drafted here to be the receiving running back for a team that had Andrew Luck, and he's the one who I think has felt this more than maybe any other player. Of every single year is a new quarterback. Every year he's trying to convince that new quarterback, like, you can trust me, look for me, I'm the check down, I'm the safety valve. I got to play within how you move and where you're looking, and it's just constantly changing. And I think this year kind of finally broke that. They got Matt Ryan. It felt like, and I did this story in the spring where he loved the idea of Matt Ryan. He loved the person. He loved the fit. He loved the style. He was friends with Cordarrelle Patterson and talked to him about how they built this. And to pull that out after 7 games, I mean, that just wasn't. It just wasn't a good thing for a lot of guys on this team, and it wasn't great for Nyheim. To his credit, he's such a good teammate, such a good interview. He said the right things in a lot of situations. He built up Sam's confidence, and it wasn't about Sam to him. It wasn't like resentment, but it was frustration that this is happening all the time. And I don't think it's a complete coincidence that he's going to a team that will not be changing the quarterback, because it's Josh Allen, and that's the kind of setting that he thought he was being drafted into with Andrew Luck, never materialized, and now it has a chance to have a possibility.
I do have questions. This is just an aside. I think all of us have watched a lot of Buffalo over the last couple of years because they've been one of the best teams in the NFL. Fantasy owners out there, if you've ever drafted a Bills running back, you'll understand what I'm about to say. I don't know that he's going to get the role he wants in Buffalo right away. Like, my understanding with Hines is that it's not just about the pass catching. I thought he wanted a bigger role in all areas. The Bills, like, if you've been a Devin Singletary owner over the last couple of years, like, he'll have a big game, and then the next week he'll have 5 carries or not very many touches. There's a lot of weapons on that offense and a lot of guys who can touch the ball. Now, maybe in an offense with Josh Allen, Hines is more comfortable with that, feels better about that. But in terms of having the heightened roll, snap count, consistent workload, like I said, if there's one thing fantasy owners know, it's that Buffalo Bills running backs do not have a consistent workload. So it'll be interesting to see what his role's like there.
Yeah, I think you could go both ways with that, because part of it is they clearly think Hines is better than what they have. So if they have a better player they trust more, maybe they play him more. It is a fair question. I do know that I think his punt return abilities mattered a lot to them too. They've had issues in that area too.
It matters to I think for Buffalo it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
This is Buffalo tried to sign J.D. McKissick in the offseason, and he went back to Washington. For Buffalo it makes a lot of sense. In terms of Hines getting what he wants, it'll be interesting to see if that materializes.
You know what
in
I think he
Buffalo's
ultimately
offense.
would want though is to win, and that is
He wants the ball,
and he wants to win.
but he wants the ball.
Yeah. I think he'll get both though.
And I think one of the things that happened with his role in the offense this season, and when they talked about it in the offseason, Chris Ballard said they're going to play in the slot more. They're going to play him in the slot more. This ended up being something that none of us really expected, which is this is a better wide receiver core than Hines has probably played with here. Mm-hmm. In 2018, in his rookie season, he caught 63 passes. Big year for him. That team had T.Y. Hilton having his last really great season as a Colt, truly great season as a Colt, and not very much elsewhere at the receiver position. They had to get a impressive half a season from Dontrell Inman to really have anything at the wide receiver position. In 2020, he had 63 catches. They had a lot of secondary options because Michael Pittman was a rookie, and he kind of had to he got hurt, so it took him a little time to develop. Hilton was kind of in and out of the lineup. Pascal was in. They had a bunch of 40 to 50 catch guys, and so there was a void for Hines to fill. The way this season has developed, Pittman is a true number one. He's playing the role that Hilton had in 18. And then Alec Pierce has become a big play number two. And Paris Campbell out of the slot over the last 3 or 4 games has really come into his own. And so the need to move him to the slot and play him more there has lessened as the season's gone along. It was going to be harder for him to get in. And then in terms of getting him in as a running back, just his career numbers as a running back, his career resume as a running back, I don't know that you would take carries away from Taylor for Hines. He's got a habit of sort of hesitating on the way into the hole. He's had that even in years where the blocking was good. His career yards per carry is around 4, which is acceptable. It's not good, It
was 4.9 last year.
That's the one year it was really good, but the other years it hasn't been.
Right.
And this year it's at 2 because obviously the blocking's terrible, but he's not creating anything more out of the blocking until last week. Last week, 5 carries for 20 yards. But he was never going to get the role he wanted here, which, I think that they think that he's more than he's always said he's more than a satellite back. Again, we'll see if Buffalo uses him in that way, but that's what he was looking for, and why ultimately, the Colts' unwillingness to expand his role beyond what it's been in Indianapolis is the reason why he's not here anymore. And that's why it wasn't a big sell-off, because this was a case of a player who didn't want to be here anymore.
Yeah, it's that, and it's also the fact that, like you said, they've got something different now with Paris Campbell in the slot. He's really emerging, and not only is he producing, but he's playing a ton. Like, his snap counts are just through the roof because he's become that player they really trust to do all these things with motions and getting guys set.
They haven't had a slot like him in the 4 years here. They haven't had a slot playing like this in the 4 years here. They've had guys in the slot. I can't remember what Chester Rogers had the first year I was here in 2018, but he was kind of in that role. He wasn't playing the way Campbell's been playing. Mm-hmm. And, obviously, is Campbell going to stay healthy? I don't know. But they've never given a slot receiver the snap counts that they're giving Paris Campbell right now. In the last 3 or 4 weeks, he's really started to take advantage of that. Yeah. So that's an element to this offense that I don't know that the Colts could have anticipated coming into this season, and it directly impacts what they were thinking they were going to do with Hines.
And also it's worth mentioning, Deion Jackson's come along, and he's had 14 targets and 14 catches. And I talked to Sky Montgomery about this a few weeks ago. They said they felt like after the first month of the season, something really clicked for Deion Jackson in pass pro and in the meeting rooms where they said, we really trust you to play if we need you to play. They didn't have that, obviously. They didn't feel like they had that coming in the year. That's why Hines seemed really valuable. So it's a move that their fans are interpreting that this is part of a tank move. It's not that. It's a player who wanted out, and it's a team that that wanted to do right by a player that they really trust. He's one of the most trusted and respected players in that locker room. And then they do feel like they have some other players they didn't have before. That's kind of some of the only positive developments for this offense. But one thing I'll mention about Hines with some of the rushing, you're right. He's not great between the tackles. He's good when he gets kind of around the edge, and I do think losing Jack Doyle hurt that too. The offensive line's been bad, but also you don't have that sealed edge. And Hines this year is averaging 2 yards a carry, but all the running backs outside Jonathan Taylor are averaging 2.9.
Taylor's
combined.
Down too, and Taylor's down. Taylor's been a 5+ guy, and right now he's at 4.3. They are down.
Yeah, and what happens?
They are down, but
what happens with that is you trust the run game less, but you're in worse situations. There's a lot of times they're in 2nd and 14. They're not going to run as much as some fans would like them to. That just isn't smart football, and it's not what they're going to do. So there are fewer touches for all the running back touches are down because they can't run the ball. They can't stay ahead of the chains, and they can't stay on the field when they turn it over the way they are. So some of these things, it's unfortunate the way it went for Hines here, but it's a good outcome for him to go to a team that is probably the Super Bowl contender, a quarterback that's not going to change. We'll see what the role looks like, but I do think he'll be happy on a couple of those fronts.
A couple of other things that ends up being a bad contract because you signed a guy for 3 years and then traded him halfway into the first year of that extension. That's a bad contract. They're going to have dead money next year because of it. And if that's where this was headed, you just shouldn't have re-signed him. I mean, there's benefit of hindsight on that. Like, there's benefit of looking back on it. But that's, again, I keep quoting Jim Aiello, former Colts beat writer Jim Aiello on this. It's kind of Chris Ballard's job to see the future. And so trading a guy a half a year into the 3-year extension you signed him for makes it a bad contract given out. And then on top of that, I think the other thing is the return. My understanding was that the Colts didn't want to give him away. I don't think they gave him away. They got 2 assets out of it. The value of those assets, though, is less than I would have liked to have seen. You know, Zach Moss is a running back that the Bills didn't use. They weren't using at all. It was an emergency only, like if it break glass in case of injury. He just hadn't had many touches this year. I know he's a former 3rd-round pick. He just hasn't done anything in Buffalo. They were out on him.
Mm-hmm.
And then a conditional 6th that can turn into a 5th. Whatever you think of the way Chris Ballard's drafted in the later rounds, that's a special teams and developmental type part of the draft. It's not the same as, like, you know, a guy that Ballard called the foundational part of the organization.
It's a lottery ticket.
You know, it's not. And so I don't know. For me, unless Zach Moss finds something that looks more like where he ended up being drafted and less like what he's looked like in Buffalo, it's not enough.
Yeah, and on this is the unfortunate reality of how this season's gone. They kind of tanked his value a little bit. He hasn't had a good year, and it doesn't look like a player that teams are going to come running for. You have to kind of know Nyheim Hines and really trust your team to get a lot more out of him than this team has gotten. He's not overcoming bad blocking and bad tight ends and all this other stuff. So the Bills they had the leverage because obviously he wanted to get a move, but also they have a situation that a lot of teams didn't have to offer where they feel like we know we'll bring this guy in and we're not going to waste him the way that the Colts wasted him.
He never really realized the explosive play potential that the Colts always saw in him. I mean, some of that's on the Colts. Some of it's also on Hines. You know, there was the big wheel route on Sunday, but they've run a lot of those before, and there have been some drop passes, some mistakes from him on those types of plays. His longest career play in Indianapolis was 36 yards. I think if you look at his speed, you would expect to see more than that. You expect to see more explosive plays than he's given since he's been there. So again, I totally understand the impulse to put all that on the coaching staff, but at some point, if you're really that explosive player in 5 years, even if you're not getting chances, which, I mean, he had a couple of 130 touch seasons, explosive play has to come somewhere. Like the really explosive one, the 60-yarder, the one that I think he was always imagined as.
Yeah.
And maybe they'll come in Buffalo because everyone in Buffalo gets 60-yarders. I think they had a tackle have 60-yard touchdown last week. That's hyperbole.
And that's what I'll be interested to see is if what the Josh Allen effect does for him. He clearly is he's betting on himself. I'm interested to see how it works. Some of that clearly has not been in this offense recently. Matt Ryan was not throwing very much down the field. Carson Wentz didn't really throw to running backs at all. Phillip Rivers obviously had a great year with Hines. I don't think it was 60-yard type down the field potential. So this is the best quarterback he's had in terms of that, just the pure arm strength. If they run a wheel route and get him open and see how it plays, because there was that play on Sunday where he caught that wheel route, set up a 1st and goal, a little better ball, and he catches
Touchdown.
it in stride.
Yep.
Just
but
so
there have been that play in the past with other quarterbacks. He dropped one in San Francisco last year, granted in a monsoon, still dropped it. There was another one. There's been a couple of missed opportunities on some of that stuff. So
yeah, he hasn't. There has been this notion, I think, with fans that, and the Colts hope for this, that this is an explosive player. It hasn't materialized yet, so he still has to prove.
He's
that.
been what he was at Indianapolis was a very effective receiving running back in the way that like you think of like with the Patriots and Kevin Falk, or like the Saints and Darren Sproles. That kind of guy you can always throw it to that guy, and he moves the chains and does that kind of thing. I think that fans always wanted to see more. I think Hines believes he can be more. The Colts coaching staff never got it out of him, and never, frankly, didn't give him enough chances to prove that he could do that, to be more than that. And we'll see now. We'll see, because I think we're going to get a lot of chance to watch Buffalo Bills games going forward. So we'll see how the Bills use him.
Yeah, and just my last point on Nyheim Hines, I want to give him a shout out as a true pro. He's always been the best interview for me on this team, one of my favorites in the league, covering 3 teams, and I'll give him credit because he was one of a couple players on offense who spoke after the game on Sunday, and we're talking about a guy that was ready to get out. So it's very easily he could have just done what I've seen some other players do, which is put their head down and just not speak and not voice their frustrations. And he had a very nice balance between making it clear that he's frustrated with how this offense is played, but also he said some nice things, gave some reinforcement to guys like Sam Ellinger and Paris Campbell, and that's Nyheim Hines for you.
He did a good. I thought he did a good job of. He never really complained about his role publicly.
Yeah.
Behind the scenes, I know that his camp wanted out, but I don't know if he ever said anything that was super damning.
No, when he get critical, it was about the performance.
It was about the overall performance of the offense. Yeah, and
which he put it on himself a lot of times too.
Yeah, no, I give him a lot of credit for never like publicly complaining about it, even though it clearly was a sore spot. The other move is a little bit harder to discuss and harder to explain. We haven't talked to Frank Reich yet. I don't know that we're going to get a ton of detailed explanation for the decision to move away from Marcus Brady. A very surprising move. I think most of us thought it would be Chris Strasser at the offensive line. I think that's the one that everyone thought was coming. The offensive coordinator is a little bit more surprising.
No doubt, especially the timing of it, where they bring in a new quarterback, give him 1 week, and then the offensive coordinator's gone. And again, it wasn't a week where like it wasn't like we watched it and said, wow, Sam Ellinger, they got to really fix the game. I didn't come away thinking that Sam didn't look comfortable or any of that. I was pretty impressed with it. So the timing is definitely weird, and this is just where like I brought up, it's the urgency right now. Again, you got to put yourself in Frank Reich's shoes. I know fans want to act like this year's over. For them, they can't operate that way. They are 3-4-1. It is still a flawed division. They have to find whatever way they can possibly find to try and climb out of this. I think this is Frank Reich just putting a little bit more on himself as the guy who was hired here to build this offense, to get the quarterback comfortable, to do all of that. He's the play caller, and I think that's what confused some people is, they fired a non-play calling offensive coordinator, and there's a lot of people that, and this is something I think we should get into, a lot of people wondered kind of what Marcus Brady's role is, and it's hard to lay out every specific element of it, but I will say that like that is a huge job to be the offensive coordinator, and Sundays are 1 day out of 7 for them, and these guys work like 100 hours a week. They talk about every time they get out, it's at night. And so the guy that's coordinating the offense is doing a lot of work. And, I mean, we're talking about a role that this non-play calling offensive coordinator that got Frank Reich a job coaching the Colts, that got Nick Sirianni a job coaching the Eagles, and we see what Nick Sirianni's doing. Obviously, it's not like Sirianni could do what he's doing now with the Eagles and have not had much of a role in the success that Phillip Rivers had in 2020 and that the Colts had on offense, with Andrew Luck when he was there too. So this is a very big role, and it's a lot of it's play design, it's offensive game planning, but it's also you're a coach for the coaches. What happens like on Sundays during a game, and it kind of spills over into the week, is that between series, each position is sitting together, players with their coach. They're looking at the iPad. They're figuring out what they're doing. And then the offense coordinator is kind of like the go-between of all of those different groups. And there's going to be coaches that say, like, this is how they're playing us. We need to adjust, or we need to get this guy a little bit more involved, or this isn't working. And he's sort of like bringing that all together. It's Frank Reich is ultimately calling the plays, but the whole plan they put together for Frank Reich to call the plays is from the offense, is a lot of the offensive coordinator. Obviously, Frank has input, but his job is much bigger than that. So, again, this just goes back to everything that I feel like I say every podcast, is people talk way too much about play calling and in general in the NFL, but it more here than I've ever seen. The obsession is all about play calling. That is a very small fraction of a coach's job, coaching staff. And you can be a great offense coordinator, or you can not get the job done as offense coordinator. That has nothing to do with play calling, because it's a 7-day-a-week job with hundreds of hours, and they critically have to get it as good of a place as they can get it right now, because they have a new quarterback and it's not working.
I also know that Frank Reich, with coordinators, does look at that role as more than just an X's and O's role. When he hired Gus Bradley, the two biggest reasons were leadership and culture. That's a part of the evaluation that I don't think any of us really see. And without we can't speculate on it. But just in terms of talking about how much it goes into that role, we have a tendency to boil assistant coaches' roles down, like you're saying. We have a tendency to boil them down to like one or two things, and it's really much bigger than that. I was looking at my phone, for those of you who watch this on YouTube, because some major breaking news just hit that does touch a little bit on something that happened with the Colts in the last couple of weeks. Forbes is reporting that that Daniel Snyder has hired Bank of America to help him sell the Washington Commanders.
Wow.
And there's some question, this is happening like right now. I haven't had a chance to read all of it yet. There is some question about whether or not he's doing that to sell a majority stake or a minority stake. But, I think the initial reaction from most people is Jim Irsay caught a dead body.
Yeah, that is something.
Irsay was the one who put out the hit on him about 2 weeks ago.
Commanders just beat the Colts, so it's like lose the battle and win the war. Yeah, that is one way where the Colts have come out on top.
Well, Irsay kind of said the thing that no other owner was willing to say, and we'll see where this is going, because Snyder keeps being adamant that he's not going to sell the team. But again, Forbes says Forbes is reporting that that Snyder has hired the Bank of America to help sell the Washington Commanders. So whatever that looks like, this feels like a very enormous moment, and one that Irsay sort of became the public face of 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, and it's interesting if you look back at the response from the Snyder camp to that. The response directly to Irsay was very, kind of
angry and defiant.
A little childish. But then there was a letter that
Snyderish.
Yeah, Snyderish.
Some children act better than him. That's
true. A lot of them. But then there was a letter that they sent to the other owners, which was very pleading, and you could tell that the Snyder camp realized that this was not just Jim Irsay deciding to say something in one moment. He had support for this. He had a lot of support for this, and Snyder became on thin ice, and Jim Irsay became just sort of the perfect. If some owner was going to step up and say this, like he said, the thing that's not been said, it was an owner who has kind of lived his mistakes in public and was secure within those. And he came out and he said, investigate me if you want, because that's been the whole Snyder thing, is his threats that, I'll dig up dirt on you. And so they rolled out the one owner who's willing to say, do it, go for it. It's not going to save you. And if he's to the point now where he's going to sell the team, then Jim Irsay won that battle.
It'd be interesting to see what's going on with that. We're getting to the point now where we got to get out to the Colts facility for Wednesday, and we'll try to get more explanation on Marcus Brady. I don't know that we're going to get the details. on exactly what was the reason for the move. I don't know if that's going to happen. In the absence of those details, it's hard to talk about that move. But if you've learned anything from this podcast, it should be this. If you give a man your tire kit, then you won't have one when you need it. But if you teach a man to use a tire kit, he won't end up with like Nate did this morning.
And if you are watching your tires more frequently, you don't have to plug holes so much, which is kind of where the Colts are this season. But yes, we could spin that on me, and that's totally fine.
For the Colts Cover 2 podcast, I'm Joel Erickson. This has been Nate Atkins.